So welcome to our seminar on Project 2025. I'm Michelle Erenberg. I am the Executive Director and co-founder at Lift Louisiana, and I'm happy to be joined this evening by Alex Moody, our staff attorney at Lift Louisiana, and Angela Adkins, the Executive Director at 10,000 Women Louisiana. Project 2025 obviously is a giant document, and so we we are really going to be focused on a few kind of core subjects that our organizations have been working on as policy advocates and in community education efforts. Just a housekeeping note, we hope that folks will keep themselves muted during the presentation, and then we will have an opportunity to answer questions at the end. So if you have a burning question, you can put it in the chat. And when we get to the question and answer section, we could either read your question from the chat, or you can use the raised hand feature, which is under reactions on your menu. And Alex will be moderating the Q&A. And we'll call on you to unmute yourself. So with that, we'll jump in. Okay, so Project 2025 is an authoritarian playbook published by the Heritage Foundation. And if implemented, this sweeping array of dangerous policies that give far-right politicians, judges, and corporations more control over Americans' lives. So in addition to outlining specific policies, Project 2025 also has a broad plan to remove federal employees with institutional knowledge and expertise and replace them with folks that are ideological, who would be prepared to ensure that the directives of this plan are carried out without question. And as I mentioned, it's a 900-page document that lays out a bunch of dangerous policies, sort of casting them as being about efficiency, generosity to the sickest, and personal virtue. But we really thought that it was important to share our analysis that really lays out the impact of some, obviously not all, of this agenda, and points to some of the elements that are, already being implemented in Louisiana. So we're going to start with reproductive freedom. So the plan calls for using every governmental lever possible to torch access to abortion and to restrict reproductive health care. In fact, the term abortion is actually used in the document 199 times. Its overall objective is for the United States Department of Health and Human Services to kind of be rebranded as the Department of Life, really rejecting any sort of notion that abortion is healthcare and promoting the idea that life begins at conception. So one of the things that I wanted to point out was something that has actually been brought up in some of the media coverage, but not necessarily in stark detail. And that is around monitoring abortions and pregnancy outcomes. So the plan would use the federal government agencies for basically abortion surveillance. So it calls for the CDC to collect data on people who have abortions and requires the states to report how many abortions are taking place within its borders, the gestational stage of the pregnancy, the reason that's provided by the patient, and the state of residence of the patient. So they really want to know, where people from banned states are going. I think that that's really alarming in much of the Gulf South and Midwest. So in addition to abortion reporting, they also call for states to report to the CDC all spontaneous miscarriages, treatments that incidentally result in the death of a child, such as chemotherapy, and also stillbirth. And they propose to redefine abortion so that it's really separated out from from other reproductive healthcare services around pregnancy, specifically miscarriage management or sort of standard ectopic pregnancy treatments. And this is really absurd because medical practice defines the same procedure used in all of these circumstances as abortion. So if the states refuse to report this data to the federal government, they are threatening to withhold funding from states. So some of the other things that the Project 2025 plan calls for is to eliminate the Reproductive Healthcare Task Force, which was established by the current administration, and replace it with an anti-abortion task force that would, push the Department of Health and Human Services to use their authority in every respect to, quote, promote the life and health of women and their unborn children. They also have some pretty specific intention to prohibit travel funding for people seeking abortion in states that have not banned it. They want to withdraw Medicaid funds from states that require insurance coverage for abortion. And they also want to direct HHS to fund junk science that promotes misinformation about the mental and physical, quote, harms of abortion. So one of the other things that the project is really looking at is using the Department of Health and Human Services to actually dismantle the abortion protections that are included under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or EMTALA. So this is a federal policy that outlines the requirements for emergency departments that receive Medicare funds. So it would eliminate the injunction that is in place in Idaho and the appeals court circuit in Idaho, based on a case that was kicked back down earlier this year by the Supreme Court. So it wants to basically eliminate that injunction, let Idaho and any other states in that appeals circuit go ahead and enforce their abortion bans, even though they are in violation of EMTALA. And then, of course, it would make sure that the Department of Justice withdrew from any ongoing litigation where it was defending the right to emergency abortion care. It's also stating to refuse to enforce EMTALA's protection for abortion care. And this obviously puts pregnant people's lives in jeopardy because it forces providers to risk criminal charges if they perform a potentially life-saving abortion care. And also, it that would result in what we've already seen in places like Idaho, is the airlifting of patients out of state who may need an emergency abortion to protect their health. So the project also has a lot of ideas around medication abortion, all kinds of strategies for restricting. And I mean, ultimately, the goal is to eliminate access to mifepristone, which, as probably most of you who have joined this evening know, is an extremely safe and effective medication that's used in the most common, is like one of the most common regimens for medication abortion in the United States. This is used up to 10 weeks in pregnancy. Oftentimes, mifepristone and misoprostol are used together. And it's important to understand that these medications, although are used in abortion, early abortions, they're also commonly used for treatment of miscarriages, postpartum hemorrhaging, labor induction, and other medical treatments. And again, they're both extremely safe and effective and used in about half of abortions in the United States. So one of the things that the plan proposes is to reinstate the medically unnecessary restrictions on mifepristone that would require in-person dispensing and also limit who can prescribe and receive the medication. So this would effectively end telehealth provision of medication abortion. And those kinds of restrictions would definitely limit access for anyone who's facing barriers to actually getting to a brick and mortar clinic, especially those living in banned states. Um, and it also recommends that uh, the federal government, essentially use the USDA to completely revoke the approval of mifepristone, and the result of that would be to remove the drug from the market entirely. So that would be a nationwide ban on this medication. So, it's just important to understand that decreasing access to these medications, this mifepristone or mifepristone and misoprostol, um, you know, could also increase the demand for procedural abortion care, which would place an additional strain on clinics that are kind of already struggling to meet the demand of having to serve patients from all over the country and from 14 states that have banned abortion, and that would result in an increased wait time for patients. And I just do want to note that in Louisiana, just last week, a law went into effect that classifies mifepristone and misoprostol as controlled dangerous substances. And so that means that, that's restricting the types of providers that can prescribe and dispense this medication. And, we have grave concerns about the delays or even denials of access to this medication for patients that really need them to treat some potentially very serious conditions, especially postpartum hemorrhage. Okay, so the Project 2025 really wants to revive the Comstock Act. So it would explicitly direct the DOJ to enforce the Comstock Act to prosecute people who send abortion pills through the mail. Um, and I think the vision here is really to through enforcement of this law, effectuate a national abortion ban without actually even having to involve Congress. And I've put, a quote from Jonathan Mitchell, who's one of the key architects of Project 2025 and a lifelong anti-abortion extremist. He told the New York Times, "We don't need a federal ban because we have Comstock on the books." Um, and so, the Comstock Act was passed in 1873. It criminalizes mailing of certain materials, including obscene materials such as pornography. It included contraceptives, information about contraceptives, and any items that can be used to produce an abortion. It has been amended over the years, but the bans, on mailing obscene materials and anything used in an abortion procedure still exist in the law. And so you could see how if the DOJ decided to actually enforce that and prosecute people for that, that could really disrupt not only the availability of medication abortion, abortion medication, but also any other medical supplies that may be used in the provision of abortion. And I think just in general, it's important to note that this increased threat of prosecution for abortion care under Project 2025 would just add fuel to this unfolding crisis in reproductive health care in Louisiana, and spread that all across the country. Because fearing potential criminalization, medical providers have already been turning away pregnant patients for life-saving medical care. they've been forcing them to wait until their condition deteriorates near to the point of being near death. We've seen maternity wards closed in rural areas. Healthcare deserts are prolific across Louisiana, and a lot of the maternity care providers have either left the state or are choosing not to either study medicine in the state or do their residencies in the state of Louisiana. Um, so uh, we have the unique experience of having already being dealt with a lot of the bad policy decisions that are outlined in Project 2025. And it's really terrifying to think that this could be replicated across the country. So it is not just about abortion in this plan. So they're also including many policies to restrict access to birth control. Birth control. So specifically, they want to obviously, they have this thing for Planned Parenthood, so they want to make sure that Planned Parenthood isn't getting any money from Medicaid. They want to remove emergency contraception from the mandate in the Affordable Care Act, which allows people to get contraception through insurance without a copay. And if that were to happen, then nearly 48 million women of reproductive age would lose their guaranteed to no cost access to EC. They also call on classifying Ella, which is an emergency contraception that can be used for up to 5 days after protected sex, as an abortion causing drug, and also remove that from the mandate. And this is important because Ella has been shown to be more effective for people with high body mass indexes. Um, and then it also has a lot of changes that it wants to make to Medicare and Medicaid services, but I'm just going to kind of focus on a few of them here. So they want to impose targeted time limits or lifetime caps on Medicaid benefits. So this would mean that once a person has been on Medicaid for a set amount of time, either potentially over the full course of their life, they could lose eligibility for their coverage regardless of their financial situation. And in Louisiana, this could mean that over 100,000 people would be at risk of losing coverage if these lifetime limits were implemented. And then in addition, it would lower the federal contribution to Medicaid, which would impose a larger financial toll on states, lowering the overall funding. And that's important to really understand because in a state like Louisiana, we obviously are not inclined to invest our state funds into almost anything that improves people's health or well-being. And so losing that federal money would be really important if Louisiana didn't have the political will to make up the difference from our own state resources. And then it would require that Medicaid cover only the very poorest and sickest. And so this would really leave out many people who have qualified for Medicaid under the Medicaid expansion. And a lot of people that really desperately need Medicaid but may not be living on that sort of lowest end of the income brackets. And then, of course, they want to set preconditions on Medicaid benefits like work requirements. So this is really a threat to not only the health, but also the economic security of millions of people in the country. Cutting off Medicaid coverage would really force a lot of individuals living with low incomes to delay or to skip necessary medical care because of the high costs. And, this would have a ripple effect throughout the economy and really have a detrimental impact on America's families. And then we're going to get into, a lot more of the specifics here. But before I hand it over to Alex, I just wanted to note that the project really is steeped with this goal to implement a broad sort of anti-sexual and reproductive health and rights agenda, like across the entire government. Um, and a lot of what it's pushing is or how it's sort of justifying this agenda is by pushing these sort of false implications that abortion is unsafe, um, and you know and that this also kind of fuels a lot of the reasoning behind restricting access to reproductive health care, contraception, abortion, but also to kind of force this abortion surveillance state. And then the other thing is that, it really wants to redefine basic sexual health education as pornography and, make that illegal, and making sure that, that schools throughout the United States are only pushing an abstinence only curricula. And, in a place like Louisiana, where most schools in the state, if they are providing any sort of sex education to the students whatsoever, it is an abstinence only sex education. And, we've seen the result of that. We have some of the highest rates um, of pregnancy and birth among young people in our state. We have really high rates of sexually transmitted infections. And we just, have seen generations and generations of young people without a lot of information about their own sexual health that they could use in order to keep themselves safe and to prevent, an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy. So this is basically taking some of the worst policy ideas that we've seen implemented in Louisiana, and replicating them and forcing them on the rest of the country. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Alex.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Good evening, y'all. My name's Alex. I'm the staff attorney at Lift Louisiana. I'm really happy to be here sharing space with everyone, even if it's for kind of a stressful and difficult topic. I'm going to be going to talk more in depth about how Project 2025 could impact LGBTQ plus people and communities, and how this document promotes a really narrow and discriminatory understanding of gender and sexual orientation. The kind of view from 1,000 feet away is that Project 2025 is full of attempts to deny the existence of LGBTQ people entirely, to disregard and to delegitimize our communities, to enable discrimination, and essentially to write LGBTQ people out of policymaking. Something that I think is, oh, sorry, can you go back? Thanks. Something I think is extremely telling about the intentions and attitudes of Project 2025 is that one of the members of their advisory board is the Alliance Defending Freedom. For those who don't know, this is a very, very well-resourced policy and litigation organization that has been identified as an anti-LGBTQ plus hate group. They've been behind almost all of the anti-LGBTQ litigation and policy maneuvers that we've seen in recent memory, as well as a lot of the anti-abortion litigation and policy. So, I mean, it's pretty just apparent from the outset that this is going to be an extremely hateful and discriminatory roadmap. Project 2025 is a direct threat to some of our hardest fought strides that we've made in anti-discrimination measures for queer and trans people in the workplace, at school, and just across all different aspects of public life. One of the scariest goals that Project 2025 puts forth is to use federal law and policy to effectively reverse the effect of Bostock versus Clayton County. This is a Supreme Court decision that came out in 2020. Frankly, it was shocking because it was a very positive ruling for LGBTQ people, and it came out of our really incredibly conservative Supreme Court. The issue in the case was that a woman had been fired because she came out as transgender at work and had begun making changes to her appearance. She argued that this was impermissible under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The court in Bostock held that under Title VII, discrimination on the basis of sex includes discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. And this has implications for the rest of the civil rights acts as well. So this is an enormous win. Project 2025 advocates for using federal law and regulation to kind of manually overturn that decision by removing this protection and allowing employers to fire people for their gender identity or their gender presentation, as well as their sexual orientation. Similarly, in education, we also under the Civil Rights Act, excuse me, sorry, my cat wants to be part of this. We have protections through Title IX in the education space. You might know Title IX from its pivotal role in requiring funding for women's sports or for protections against sexual harassment in educational settings. Project 2025 would essentially rescind all of our Title IX rights that protect folks on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And this would allow, in many cases, people to be actually encouraged to discriminate against these students and staff at schools. And it would also include dropping any open investigations into this kind of discrimination that are going on now. Additionally, Project 2025 also advocates for the criminalization of educators and librarians who provide their students with access to books or other resources regarding gender identity or sexual orientation, and would have them placed on the sex offender registry for doing this. So this is very scary just from a criminalization standpoint. Any interaction with the criminal legal system is awful, especially for educators who are just trying to do their jobs. But it also perpetuates really harmful misinformation that LGBTQ people are a danger to children or that they're more likely to be sex offenders as compared to their cisgender or heterosexual counterparts, which is just not true. And finally, we've already seen this particular part in LA or in Louisiana. Our state legislature passed this last legislative session, but Project 2025 advocates for policies that require teachers to use the name and pronouns that correlate with a student's sex assigned at birth as kind of defined on their birth certificate, which is going to forcibly out students, enable bullying, and just in general create a really hostile and unwelcoming and unsafe environment in schools. They are also advocating for the end of all federal government and private sector DEI initiatives. These aim to increase racial and gender representation in these workplaces and programs. Part of doing this is advocating for increased religious exemptions, which would allow agencies or organizations that receive federal funding to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people openly. One of the most troubling examples of this is in adoption agencies or organizations that work with kids in foster care, who would now be allowed to refuse to provide services to young people who are queer, trans, gender expansive, or anyone who kind of exists outside of the strict heteronormative gender presentation. I feel like this is the theme of tonight, but this will not come as a shock to anyone joining us from Louisiana, but we have seen a massive trend of homophobic and transphobic state legislators bringing laws attempting to limit access to gender-affirming care for minors. This is true across the country, but it is also actively being challenged in federal court, meaning that we're likely to see it before the Supreme Court in the next year or two. Project 2025 includes a stated goal not only of ending access to gender-affirming care for minors across the nation, even in states where this would be massively unpopular, but it also aims to end gender-affirming care for adults by ending federal funding in Medicaid or Medicare or through any other kind of federally funded means. Throughout the document, Project 2025 falsely portrays gender-affirming care as harmful and dangerous to society, when in reality, we know that this care is absolutely critical and life-saving in many conditions or in many cases, and that it improves the quality of life for the people that need it. We have some very clear data showing that gender-affirming surgeries have extremely low regret rates compared to other surgeries even. The regret rates are under 1%. And for comparison, the regret rate for knee surgery is between 6 and 30%. And the regret rate for having children is around 7%. So these are very, very happy customers. Singling out this type of medical care is just contrary to data and is solely based in transphobia. So So I struggled a little bit with what to call this section because it covers a lot of things that Project 2025 does throughout the giant document. It's not like contained in one specific section, but basically it advocates for systemically going through all federal law and regulation in order to erase any acknowledgement of LGBTQ plus people and attempt to essentially legislatively erase them from consideration in the way that our country is governed. This would include removing any mention of sexual orientation and gender identity from federal regulation, law, and even grant funding opportunities. As we discussed earlier, this means eliminating LGBTQ plus people from non-discrimination language in federal regulations and repealing any requirements to enforce non-discrimination protections for these groups. It would end all LGBTQ plus equity programs and remove mention of gender or reproductive health in federal policy in several areas. In addition to just LGBTQ plus equity, the project advocates for an end to all interventions in the federal government that support creating diverse and inclusive environments, or just generally acknowledging or attempting to mediate the impacts of historic and ongoing racism in our country. So it is very sweeping in that. And beyond just explicitly inclusive programming, it also advocates for erasing the existence of queer and trans communities by ending the collection of data on LGBTQ people, both in the census and in disease surveillance systems. So this would mean that we just have worse data all around that doesn't account at all for the needs of LGBTQ people and their communities, and that our governmental programs will just in general do a worse job in meeting these needs. And finally, I didn't know where to put this one. It's kind of a third category, but they're also advocating for ending support for LGBTQ plus equality work in US foreign policy. Right. So according to the authors of Project 2025, families, quote, comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society. This kind of ideology threatens future and current families because it promotes the idea that a nuclear family and marriage between a man and a woman are the only suitable living environments for children. The plan calls for the federal government to take this official stance that families are made up of a married father, mother, and children. And this is going to redirect federal funds to support a, quote, like biblically based definition of family. And in doing so, this deprioritizes and removes funding and support, not only for people who are in queer relationships, but also for single parents, step parents, people who are divorced, people who rely on certain types of fertility services to build their families, grandparents who are parenting their grandchildren, or just anybody whose circumstance doesn't align with the super conservative and narrow definition of a nuclear family. They're also advocating for allowing or even encouraging adoption and foster care services to refuse to work with LGBTQ married couples or single parents, and allowing child welfare funding to be used to fund religious marriage and relationship education. They describe the Biden administration's focus on LGBTQ equity as subsidizing single motherhood, disincentivizing work, and penalizing marriage. And they want to replace any inclusive policies with, quote, those encouraging marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. So not only is this alarming as an aggressive attempt to erase LGBTQ plus people from the conversation and delegitimize their families, but it also has really troubling implications as a policy approach to gender roles. And specifically, there is an overemphasis on this very, very patriarchal version of the nuclear family as the only way to be a cis man or a cis woman. And with that, I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Angela, to talk about what Project 2025 has to say about education.
Thank you, Alex. Education. Project 2025's education agenda proposes a drastic overhaul of federal education policy from early childhood through higher education. Some Project 2025 proposals would disproportionately harm conservative rural areas. According to Project 2025, an incoming conservative administration would dismantle the U.S. Department of Education, and that has been the #1 goal of the Heritage Foundation for many, many decades. Would also roll back the Title IX protections against sex-based discrimination. The administration could enact with authority of the executive branch alone. As Alex noted, it would eliminate protections for LGBTQ plus young people in schools. Specifically, it would enact a nationwide policy like the one in Louisiana that prohibits a public education employee from addressing students by their preferred name and pronouns. Since 1965, Title I has provided critical financial help to high poverty schools and districts. Project 2025 plans to eliminate Title I funding entirely. In its place, states would receive no strings attached block grants with zero regulations or oversight. Project 2025 proposes to phase out federal spending on Title I over a 10-year period, with states left to decide whether and how to continue that funding. However, many types of schools across many types of communities receive critical support through Title I. In Louisiana, 3.84% of spending comes from Title I, the third highest percentage in the nation. It's hard to believe that low-income students in Louisiana would benefit from a shift to state control. Reduce federal funding for students with disabilities and remove guardrails designed to ensure these children are adequately served by schools. Promote universal private school choice through school vouchers and educational savings accounts. And we all saw that in the last two legislative sessions. Far from serving lower income families, ESAs benefit predominantly private school families. It siphons valuable funds from public schools and have destabilized the state's budget. Project 2025 reflects a white Christian nationalist agenda as much as it reflects a traditional conservative education policy agenda. The plan calls for a large-scale tax credit scholarship program. It would substantially increase the federal government's role in K through 12 education. A parent's Bill of Rights, and where have we heard that term before in Louisiana, which it claims would ensure families have a, quote, fair hearing in court when the federal government enforces policies that undermine their rights to raise, educate, and care for their children, end quote. In reality, this policy would make the censorship of academic learning and book banning in schools a federal priority. And that's where your tax money will be going. Student loans. Project 2025 serves as an authoritarian roadmap to implement destructive new policies that would make college even less affordable, privatize the federal student loan portfolio, and remove protections from predatory colleges that leave students with excessive debt. Project 2025 proposes a new student loan repayment plan that would force student loan borrowers to shell out thousands more each year in payments. And it would eliminate all time and employment-based student debt relief, and specifically calls for the elimination of PSLF and any debt discharged under income-driven repayment. Would also eliminate Head Start. Despite strong evidence that the program has helped boost educational attainment and fight intergenerational poverty, Project 2025 proposes eliminating Head Start in its entirety. Head Start has served nearly 40 million children and plays a critical role in supporting the healthy development of children living in poverty and in helping parents seek employment and educational opportunities. Eliminating Head Start would vastly restrict the number of available childcare slots, dramatically increase childcare costs for families living in poverty, and undermine economic growth and exacerbate inequality. Without Head Start, states would have to take on a larger share of funding to reach universal pre-K access, something that Louisiana is not going to be inclined to do. If enacted, this would undermine economic growth and exacerbate inequalities among families with young children. And with that, I'm going to throw it back over to Michelle.
Thank you, Angela. So this has been coming up throughout the presentations of Angela and Alex tonight, but I just wanted to close our presentation to putting a finer point on the way in which Project 2025 would take a whole of government approach to dismantling diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs and really turn civil rights enforcement on its head. This plan really threatens to roll back, like incredible progress that we've made in terms of diversity and equity protections in education, throughout the federal government, in labor and private business, and also in relation to foreign aid. Project 2025 views efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion as unlawful schemes of discrimination, and it would have the Department of Justice weaponized to prosecute entities that have DEI programs. This would essentially criminalize both public and private efforts to expand educational and economic opportunities by treating DEI programs as illegal discrimination. And included in this, and there's just so much that we could get through, but I'm pulling out some of the things that I think we really need to be aware of. So it would repeal protections against discrimination in housing and make it easier to sell off public housing to private developers. It would undo all federal investments in workplace DEI initiatives. It would prohibit the federal government from spending any money on critical race theory training. And critically, it would eliminate equal employment opportunity data collection, which collects information about racial diversity in the American workforce, including labor force participation for women and other underrepresented groups. And this has really allowed the government to analyze historical trends and really come up with plans on how better to invest the federal government, our resources, tax dollars, into programs that really incentivize creating a diverse workforce. Project 2025 claims that critical race theory and DEI efforts are affronts to the First Amendment and unlawful discrimination, and it would end the use of disparate impact in analyzing whether school systems were treating students differently in matters of discipline and special education on the basis of race. This has obviously been an existing huge problem that in Louisiana that people have been trying to solve for decades. And it has really only been in, I would say, probably the last 2 decades that the federal government has really taken this seriously and invested, any resources or effort, and all of that would be undone under this plan. The focus on dismantling DEI initiatives and prosecuting even private entities that maintain them, and this obsession with rooting out critical race theory are, again, present throughout this entire manifesto. Project 2025's recommendations are harmful to many, but we just really cannot emphasize enough that they would, without a doubt, be in particularly harmful to communities of color and to the queer and trans community. And with that, we're going to end the presentation and we can open it up to questions.